The reports called her disobedient. Dangerous. So the Alpha King went himself, and discovered an Omega quietly bleeding to save warriors who despised her. But we're not starting there. We're starting 3 nights before he arrived. When the storm came. When everything she'd hidden began to unravel. The rain fell like punishment against the stone walls of the healer's cottage, each drop a hammer strike that echoed the pounding in Evelyn's skull. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the warrior's chest, feeling the jagged tear in his lung beneath her fingertips, sensing the poison spreading through his bloodstream like black ink in water. He'd been mauled by a rogue pack at the northern border. The other healers had already declared him lost. They'd walked away with clean hands and clear consciences. But Evelyn couldn't walk away. She never could. The forbidden magic stirred inside her ribs like a caged animal sensing freedom. It whispered promises. It showed her how easy it would be to reach inside this dying man and knit his torn flesh back together, to draw the poison out and take it into herself instead. The magic didn't care that using it was illegal. It didn't care that every time she called on it, she carved another piece of her own life away. It only cared about the healing. Her breath came shallow and fast. Outside, lightning split the sky, and for one brilliant moment, the cottage flooded with white light that turned everything sharp and unforgiving. She saw the warrior's face clearly then. Young. Maybe 20 summers. His mate would be waiting for news. His children, if he had them. His mother. Someone loved him. Someone would weep if he died on this table while she stood by and did nothing. The magic surged. No. Not yet. She had to be careful. The Alpha King's enforcers had been circling the village for weeks, asking questions about healings that shouldn't have been possible. About Omegas who exceeded their station. About forbidden practices that reeked of old magic, the kind that had been banned 3 generations ago when the last blood witch nearly destroyed the Eastern Territories. Evelyn wasn't a blood witch. But what lived inside her was close enough that no one would care about the distinction. She pulled her hands back. Made herself step away from the table. Her whole body screamed in protest. The magic writhed and clawed, demanding to be used, demanding to save this life that was slipping away with every labored breath. She'd learned to ignore that demand. She'd gotten good at it over the years, at watching people die when she could have saved them, at carrying that weight in her chest like stones. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the storm felt like an omen. Tonight, the magic felt stronger than it ever had before, as if something in the world had shifted and given it more room to breathe. She could feel it pressing against her skin from the inside, hot and urgent and almost alive. The warrior gasped. His back arched off the table. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. Evelyn's resolve crumbled. Her hands found his chest again, and this time she didn't hold back. The magic exploded out of her like a dam breaking. It poured through her palms in waves of silver heat, flooding into the warrior's broken body, finding every torn vessel and shredded muscle and corrupted cell. She felt his pain as if it were her own. Felt the poison burning through his blood. Felt the exact moment his lung began to knit itself back together, the flesh remembering its original shape and returning to it like a story told in reverse. But she felt something else too. The connection. It snapped into place between them like a rope drawn tight, and suddenly she wasn't just healing him. She was bound to him. Bound to his life, his death, his fate. The magic had always worked this way, but never this strongly. Never this completely. She could feel him on the other end of that invisible tether, feel his heartbeat synchronizing with hers, feel his gratitude and his confusion, and underneath it all, his absolute terror of what she was. And beneath even that, she felt something older. Something vast and patient and waiting. The magic showed her a vision so quickly she almost missed it. A wolf. Massive. Silver-white like moonlight on snow. eyes the color of winter storms. Standing on a ridge above the village with rain streaming down his fur, watching. Waiting. Coming closer with every healing she performed. The Alpha King. Evelyn ripped her hands away from the warrior's chest. The connection severed with a pain that nearly dropped her to her knees. She staggered backward, her shoulders hitting the cottage wall hard enough to rattle her teeth. Her palms burned. When she looked down, she saw the silver light still dancing across her skin like embers that refused to die. The warrior was breathing. His color was returning. In an hour, he'd wake up whole and healthy and confused about why he wasn't dead. And Evelyn would be one step closer to her own end. Because that was the price. That was always the price. Every life she saved carved days, weeks, months from her own remaining time. She could feel it now, the exhaustion sinking into her bones like lead, the way her vision blurred at the edges, the strange hollow sensation in her chest as if something essential had been scooped out and discarded. She'd given this warrior maybe 6 months of her life. Maybe more. The magic didn't deal in exact numbers. Outside, the storm intensified. Thunder rolled across the valley like a growl from something enormous and displeased. Evelyn pressed her back against the wall and slid down until she was sitting on the cold stone floor, her knees drawn up to her chest, her whole body shaking with the aftermath of what she'd done. They would find out. They always found out eventually. Someone would talk. Someone would notice that the warriors she touched always survived their wounds no matter how grievous. Someone would add up the impossible healings and realize what she was. And when they did, the Alpha King would come. The vision flashed through her mind again. Silver-white fur. Storm-colored eyes. The sense of something inevitable bearing down on her like an avalanche, beautiful and deadly and utterly unstoppable. Evelyn closed her eyes and felt the silver magic still humming under her skin, still hungry, still waiting for the next broken thing it could fix regardless of what it cost her. The reports would call her disobedient. Dangerous. A threat to the pack's natural order. But the truth was so much worse than that. The truth was that she couldn't stop. The magic wouldn't let her stop. And every life she saved brought her one step closer to the moment when the Alpha King would finally arrive and discover what she'd been hiding. Not rebellion. Sacrifice. And a power that was slowly, inevitably, killing her. He came with the dawn. Evelyn was outside the cottage when she felt him, her arms full of bloodied linens she'd been about to burn. The air changed first. Grew heavier. Charged with something that made the small hairs on the back of her neck rise and her pulse kick into a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. The magic inside her went absolutely still. It had never done that before. In all the years she'd carried this curse, the magic had been constant motion, constant hunger, constant noise. But now it quieted like a wild thing sensing a predator, and that terrified her more than anything else could have. She dropped the linens. Turned toward the tree line. He emerged from the forest as a man, not a wolf, and somehow that made it worse. Made it more real. He was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, broad-shouldered in a way that spoke of violence survived and battles won. Dark hair, longer than was practical, falling around a face that was all hard angles and sharp edges except for his mouth, which was surprisingly full and currently set in a grim line that suggested he wasn't any happier about this encounter than she was. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Storm gray. Exactly like the vision had shown her. He studied her with an intensity that felt like being dissected. His gaze traveled from her tangled black hair to her bare feet, lingering on her hands where the silver light had left faint scars across her palms like lightning strikes frozen in flesh. She watched him notice those scars. Watched understanding flicker across his features. "Evelyn," he said, and her name in his voice sounded like a verdict. She hadn't expected him to know it. Hadn't expected him to say it like that, with a familiarity that suggested he'd been carrying it around in his mouth for a while, tasting it, learning its shape. The casual intimacy of it sent something hot and unwelcome spiraling through her chest. "You're him." It wasn't a question. Couldn't be a question when everything in her body was screaming recognition, when the magic that had gone so still was now beginning to wake again, but different this time. Curious. Reaching toward him like a flower turning toward the sun. Ronan. He took a step closer. Just one. It was enough to make her aware of how much larger he was, how easily he could close the distance between them if he chose. Alpha King, if you prefer the formalities. But given what I know about you, I suspect we're past formalities. You came to arrest me. She heard how flat her voice sounded. How resigned. She'd known this moment was coming. Had rehearsed it in her mind 1,000 times. But none of those rehearsals had included the strange pull she felt toward him, the way her magic seemed to be straining in his direction like it recognized something in him that she couldn't see. No, the word surprised her enough that she met his eyes again. Found something complicated there, something that looked almost like reluctance. I came because my wolves keep dying and then not dying. Because there are reports of an Omega in this territory who refuses orders, who defies the healer's counsel, who makes the impossible happen with enough regularity that even I couldn't ignore it anymore. So you came to see the disobedient Omega for yourself. I came to see if the reports were true. He moved closer again, and this time she made herself hold her ground even though every instinct screamed at her to run. They called you dangerous. Said you were practicing forbidden magic. Said you were a threat that needed to be eliminated before you could poison the whole pack with your influence. Her throat tightened. And what do you think? He was close enough now that she could see the exact moment something shifted in his expression. Could see the way his jaw tightened and his eyes darkened with what might have been anger, except it didn't feel directed at her. I think, he said slowly, that I've been watching you for 3 weeks. I think I've seen you heal warriors who should have died. I think I've seen you take their pain into yourself and pretend you're fine when you can barely stand afterward. I think I've seen you give pieces of your own life to save men who would spit on you if they knew what you were. The words hit her like physical blows. He'd been watching. For 3 weeks. Which meant he'd seen everything. Every healing. Every moment of weakness after. Every time she'd staggered home and collapsed on her floor and woken up hours later with less life left in her than she'd started with. I think, he continued, his voice dropping to something that sounded almost gentle, that the only thing you're guilty of is caring too much. And I think that whatever magic you're using is slowly killing you, and you know it, and you're doing it anyway. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think past the roaring in her ears. No one had ever seen it before. No one had ever looked at her and understood what it cost. They saw the healings and called them miracles or abominations depending on their politics, but they never saw her. Never saw the price. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why watch for 3 weeks? Why not just arrest me on the first night? Something flickered across his face. Something that looked almost like pain. Because the reports didn't make sense. He lifted one hand, stopped just short of touching her, his fingers hovering inches from her cheek like he was fighting the urge to close that final distance. They painted you as reckless. Power-hungry. Someone using forbidden magic for personal gain. But that's not what I saw. What did you see? Sacrifice. The word fell between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples through everything. I saw someone trying to save everyone but herself. And I saw something else. Something the reports didn't mention because the idiots who wrote them didn't understand what they were looking at. Her magic surged. She felt it reaching for him again, that strange pull that made no sense, that felt less like attraction and more like inevitability. Like the magic recognized him as something necessary. Something that completed a pattern she didn't understand. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. His hand finally made contact, his fingers brushing her cheek so lightly she might have imagined it, except for the way her whole body ignited at the touch. Except for the way the magic inside her suddenly roared to life and she felt something snap into place between them, the same kind of connection she made with the people she healed but stronger. So much stronger it nearly dropped her. She gasped. Staggered. He caught her. His hands on her arms, steadying her, and the contact sent another shock through her system. She could feel him now. Feel his heartbeat. Feel the power that lived in him, Alpha's strength that was nothing like her healing magic but somehow complementary to it. Like two pieces of something that had been broken apart and were finally touching again. What is this? Her voice came out ragged. Desperate. His eyes had gone dark. Almost black. She watched him fight for control, watched the muscles in his jaw work as he processed whatever he was feeling. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I don't know yet. But I've felt it since the first night I saw you. Like something in me recognized something in you. Like I've been looking for you my entire life without knowing it. That's not possible. No, he agreed. It's not. And yet. He was still holding her arms. Still close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him, could smell pine and rain and something wilder underneath, something that belonged to the wolf and not the man. She should pull away. Should put distance between them before this got more complicated than it already was. But the magic wouldn't let her. It was singing now, a high clear note of recognition and rightness that made her want to lean into him, made her want to trust him in a way that defied all logic and self-preservation. The magic you're using, he said quietly. The healing. It's bound to something, isn't it? Every time you save someone, you tie yourself to them. To their fate. To their death. She went rigid. How do you know that? Because I can feel them. Every connection you've made. Every thread binding you to the warriors you've saved. They're all there, pulling at you, draining you. His hands tightened on her arms. Not enough to hurt. Just enough to anchor her. And there's something else. Something older than those connections. Something that feels like. He trailed off. She watched him struggle with words that clearly didn't exist for what he was trying to explain. Like destiny, she whispered, and hated how the words sounded like surrender. His eyes snapped to hers. Yes. The storm that had raged through the night was gone, but the air still felt electric, still felt like the moment before lightning struck. Evelyn stood in the circle of the Alpha King's arms and felt her entire understanding of her magic, her curse, her life, begin to shift and reform into something new. Something terrifying. I should go, she said, even though her body made no move to pull away. You should. But his hands didn't release her. They're planning to bring formal charges. The Healers' Council. They want you tried for violating the old laws. They'll have you exiled at best. Executed at worst. The words should have frightened her. Should have sent her running. But all she could focus on was the way he was looking at her, like she was a problem he needed to solve, like she was something precious and breakable, like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. Then why are you here? She asked. Why warn me? His thumb traced a small circle on her arm, the gesture almost unconscious, and she watched something fierce and possessive flash through his eyes. Because I don't take orders from the Healers' Council, he said. Because you're mine to protect now, whether you want to be or not. And because whatever this is between us, whatever connection we're feeling, I'm not walking away until I understand it. I'm not yours. No, he agreed, and something in his voice made her shiver. Not yet. But you will be. Because that magic inside you? It's not just tied to the people you've healed. It's tied to me. Has been since the moment I entered this territory. And I think we both need to figure out what that means before the council makes their move and we run out of time." He released her then, stepping back, and the loss of contact felt like being cut free from an anchor she hadn't known she needed. The magic inside her cried out in protest, reaching for him even as he moved away. 3 days, he said. That's how long you have before they come for you. If you want to run, I won't stop you. But if you want answers, if you want to understand why your power recognizes me, why every instinct you have is telling you to trust me even though you know better, he paused, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that stole her breath. Then meet me at the old shrine. Tonight. When the moon rises. Then he was gone, disappearing back into the tree line like he'd never been there at all, leaving her standing in front of her cottage with burning palms and a racing heart and the absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. Evelyn didn't go inside. She stood in the clearing long after Ronan disappeared, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to stop the trembling that had nothing to do with the morning cold. The magic was still agitated inside her, still reaching for something it couldn't have, and the frustration of it made her want to scream. Or cry. Or both. She pressed her scarred palms against her eyes and let herself remember. Let herself fall back into the memories she usually kept locked away because looking at them hurt too much, because they reminded her of everything she'd lost and everything she could never be. She'd been 12 when the magic first appeared. 12 years old, standing in her family's cottage, watching her little brother convulse on the floor from poison he'd accidentally ingested while playing in the gardens. The healers had come. They'd examined him with grave faces and sadder eyes and told her parents there was nothing to be done. The poison was too advanced. He had maybe an hour. They should say their goodbyes. Evelyn had refused to accept it. She dropped to her knees beside her brother's thrashing body and put her hands on his chest, and something inside her had torn open. Silver light had poured from her palms. She'd felt his pain become hers, felt the poison burning through her own veins as she pulled it from his body into hers, felt her magic knitting his organs back together while her own screamed in protest. When it was over, her brother had been fine. And Evelyn had been marked. The silver scars had appeared on her palms within hours. The healers had recognized them immediately. Old magic. Forbidden magic. The kind that had been banned because it demanded too high a price, because it created bonds that shouldn't exist, because it gave Omegas power that threatened the natural hierarchy. Her parents had tried to hide it. Had wrapped her hands in bandages and told everyone her brother's recovery was a miracle from the moon goddess. But secrets like that never stayed buried. Someone had seen the light. Someone always saw. The pack had turned on her within weeks. She remembered the whispers. The way people crossed to the other side of the path when they saw her coming. The way mothers pulled their children close and told them not to look at the cursed girl, not to speak to her, not to let her touch them because her magic was wrong and unnatural and dangerous. She'd been 13 when they tried to take her magic away. The pack's elder healers had performed a ritual meant to sever her connection to the forbidden power. They'd cut her palms open and bled her while chanting words in the old language, words meant to purge the corruption from her bloodline. She'd screamed until her voice gave out. Had felt the magic fighting to stay, clawing at her from the inside, refusing to be torn away even as the ritual tried to rip it out by the roots. It hadn't worked. The magic had been too deeply woven into her soul. Removing it would have killed her. So they'd settled for exile instead. Sent her to the outer territories where she couldn't corrupt the heart of the pack, where she could live out her cursed life far from decent wolves who didn't want their children exposed to her influence. Her parents hadn't fought for her. Hadn't even said goodbye. That had been the worst part. Not the exile itself, but the relief she'd seen in her mother's eyes when the elder council had pronounced their verdict. The way her father had turned his back and walked away without a single word of comfort or love or regret. They'd been glad to be rid of her. Evelyn dropped her hands from her face and stared at the cottage that had been her prison and her sanctuary for the last 8 years. She'd learned to live with the loneliness. Had taught herself to find purpose in the healing even when it cost her. Had convinced herself that saving lives was enough, that she didn't need acceptance or belonging or love when she could have usefulness instead. But standing here now, with the memory of Ronan's hands on her arms and his voice saying her name like it meant something, she felt the lie of that conviction crumbling. She'd been so alone. So tired of carrying this burden by herself, of making impossible choices in the dark, of bleeding out her life force for people who would celebrate her death if they knew what she was. And then he'd appeared. The Alpha King himself. The one person in the entire territory who could destroy her with a single word. And instead of destroying her, he'd looked at her like she was something worth saving. Like she was someone worth knowing. The magic surged again, and this time she let it show her what it wanted. Let it pull up the vision it had been trying to share since the moment Ronan had touched her. She saw threads. Thousands of them. Silver and shimmering, stretching out from her body like a spider's web. Each one connected to a life she'd saved, to a warrior whose death she'd prevented, to a fate she'd altered. She'd known about these connections. Had felt them forming every time she healed someone. But she'd never seen them like this. Never understood how extensive the web had become. How trapped she was in the center of it. Each thread pulled at her constantly. She could feel them now that she was paying attention, could feel the steady drain as each connection siphoned away small pieces of her remaining life force. Some threads were thin and barely noticeable. Others were thick as rope, binding her to warriors who'd been on the edge of death when she'd pulled them back. The magic showed her more. Showed her what would happen when those warriors died. When their natural time came, or when they fell in battle, or when age finally claimed them. The threads wouldn't break. They'd pull taut. And every death at the other end of those connections would tear a piece of her soul away until there was nothing left. She was going to die. Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon. Too soon. The magic could show her that much with certainty. Unless. The vision shifted. Showed her something else. A thread different from all the others. Thicker. Brighter. Pulsing with a light that felt like dawn breaking. This thread didn't stretch out from her body. It coiled around her heart, waiting. And at the other end of it, barely visible but growing stronger, she saw him. Ronan. The Alpha King. The connection between them wasn't like the others. Wasn't formed through healing or sacrifice. This was older. Deeper. Something that had existed long before she'd touched him, maybe long before either of them had been born. The magic recognized it as fundamental. As necessary. As the one thing that could change everything. But it showed her something else too. Showed her that this connection worked both ways. That if she claimed it, if she let it fully form, she wouldn't just be bound to him. He'd be bound to her. To her magic. To her curse. Every life she saved would drain him too. Every death at the end of those silver threads would wound him just as deeply. She'd be killing him. Slowly. Surely. Just by existing in his orbit. Evelyn opened her eyes and found herself on her knees in the dirt without remembering how she'd gotten there. Her whole body ached. Her palms burned where the scars lived. And inside her chest, the magic coiled and waited for her to make a choice it had no right to demand. Go to him tonight. Let the connection form. Bind him to her fate and drag him down into her curse. Or run. Disappear into the deep forest where even the Alpha King couldn't find her. Let the threads pull her apart alone, let herself fade quietly without taking anyone else with her, especially not him. Especially not the man who'd looked at her like she was worth something. She thought about her parents. About the pack that had exiled her. About every person who'd called her dangerous and cursed and wrong. They'd been right, in a way. Her magic was dangerous. Did threaten the natural order. Would absolutely destroy anyone who got too close. But Ronan had gotten close anyway. Had stood there with his hands on her arms and his storm-gray eyes seeing straight through every wall she'd built, and he'd called her sacrifice instead of disobedience. Had offered her protection instead of punishment. Had felt the same impossible pull she'd felt, and instead of running from it, he'd asked her to meet him. To trust him. To let him help carry this burden she'd been shouldering alone for 8 years. Evelyn pushed herself to her feet. Her legs shook. Her vision blurred. She was so tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of being alone. Tired of making every decision from a place of fear and shame and the absolute conviction that she didn't deserve anything better than this half-life she'd been living. Maybe she didn't deserve better. But maybe, just maybe, she was tired of letting that stop her from wanting it anyway. She looked at the cottage. At the bloodied linen still scattered on the ground. At the herbs hanging in the window and the healing tools arranged on the shelves inside. This place had been her whole world for so long. Her punishment and her purpose all wrapped up together. But it wasn't enough anymore. Not after feeling what it was like to be seen. To be understood. To have someone look at her curse and call it sacrifice instead of sin. The sun climbed higher. The forest around her cottage stirred with morning sounds, birds and wind and the distant rush of the river. Somewhere in those trees, Ronan was waiting for nightfall. Waiting to see if she'd choose to run or if she'd choose him. Choose the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face this alone anymore. Evelyn turned toward the cottage and started gathering her things. Not many. She'd never owned much. But enough. The herbs that kept the pain manageable. The leather journal where she'd documented every healing, every connection, every day she'd lost to the magic's hunger. The small carved wolf her brother had made for her before the exile, the only thing she had left from her old life. She didn't know what would happen tonight at the shrine. Didn't know if Ronan was her salvation or her destruction or some complicated mixture of both. But she knew she couldn't keep living like this. Couldn't keep bleeding herself dry for people who despised her while pretending the loneliness didn't hurt. Couldn't keep refusing every possibility of connection because she was afraid of the cost. The magic hummed its approval. That bright thread connecting her to Ronan pulsed with warmth. And for the first time in 8 years, Evelyn let herself hope that maybe the curse that had defined her entire life was about to become something else entirely. Something that looked almost like destiny. The shrine was older than memory. Evelyn had passed it 100 times over the years, always at a distance, always with the uncomfortable sense that the ancient stones were watching her. Most wolves avoided it. The place carried a weight that made even the boldest warriors uneasy, a heaviness in the air that whispered of powers that had existed long before the current pacts, long before the territories had been divided and the laws written. Now she stood at its edge as the sun began its descent, and the weight felt different. Felt like welcome. The shrine sat in a circular clearing where the trees grew in a perfect ring, their branches reaching toward the center but never quite touching, as if even nature respected the sacred space. Stone pillars rose from the earth in a pattern that might have been random or might have been deliberate. It was impossible to tell after centuries of weathering. Moss covered most of the surfaces, thick and green and somehow luminescent in the fading light. But it was the altar in the center that drew her attention. Smooth black stone, waist-high, carved with symbols she didn't recognize but felt she should. Her fingers itched to trace them. The magic inside her stirred restlessly, no longer the constant hungry thing she'd grown accustomed to, but something else. Something alert and focused and almost reverent. She took a step into the clearing. The air changed instantly. Grew thicker. Charged with an energy that made her skin prickle and her breath catch. It felt like stepping into a room where important conversations had taken place, where decisions that shaped the world had been made, where the veil between what was and what could be grew gossamer thin. You came. His voice came from behind her, low and rough, and she turned to find Ronan emerging from the opposite tree line. He'd changed since this morning. Wore different clothes now, dark and simple, but it was more than that. He carried himself differently here. Less like a king and more like a supplicant. Like this place commanded his respect in a way even his crown couldn't. You knew I would. She was surprised by how steady her voice sounded when everything inside her was trembling. Hoped. He moved toward her slowly, each step deliberate, giving her time to object or retreat. There's a difference. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set like he was bracing for something. In the dying light, his eyes looked darker. Wilder. More wolf than man. Why here? She asked. Why this place? Because this is where it started. He gestured to the altar, to the pillars, to the ancient stones that had stood witness to centuries of pack history. Before there were territories. Before there were laws about who could have power and who couldn't. Before omegas were considered lesser and alphas were considered divine. There was just magic. And this place was where it lived. Evelyn looked at the altar again. At the symbols carved into its surface. Now that she was closer, she could see they weren't just decorative. They told a story. Her eyes traced the shapes, following the narrative carved into stone. A wolf. Silver bright. Standing alone on a mountain. Below it, shadows. Darkness spreading like a plague. And descending from above, another wolf. Massive. Made of light or lightning or something that blazed too bright to look at directly. The flame bearer, Ronan said quietly, coming to stand beside her. That's what the old stories called her. An omega born with power that shouldn't exist. Power that could heal any wound, cure any sickness, reverse any death. Evelyn's breath caught. Her palms burned. The stories say she was a gift from the moon goddess during a time when the packs were dying from a curse that turned wolves against each other. The flame bearer could heal the cursed. Could pull the darkness out of them and take it into herself instead. She saved hundreds. Thousands. But? Evelyn whispered, because there was always a but in stories like this. But the power had a cost. Every life she saved bound her to that wolf's fate. When they died, she felt it. And there were so many deaths. So many threads pulling at her. The stories say she burned from the inside out, consumed by the very magic that made her special. The words hit too close. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself and tried to breathe through the sudden tightness in her chest. There's more. Ronan's hand found hers, his fingers threading through hers with a gentleness that contradicted his strength. The stories say the moon goddess saw what was happening. Saw the flame bearer dying. And she sent someone to share the burden. He turned her to face him, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek, and the touch sent sparks cascading through her entire body. An alpha, he continued, his voice dropping to something almost reverent. The strongest of his generation. The stories called him the Storm King. They say he was born in a lightning strike, that power lived in his blood the same way healing lived in hers. And when he found the flame bearer, when he claimed her as his own, something changed. What changed? The bonds she'd formed. The threads draining her life away. They didn't disappear. But they shifted. Split between them. Half the burden fell on her, half fell on him. Together, they could carry what would have destroyed her alone. Evelyn stared at him. At the intensity in his gray eyes. At the way he was looking at her like he was telling her more than just an old story. You think that's us, she whispered. You think I'm. I think, he interrupted gently, that you have scars on your palms that match the description of the flame bearer exactly. I think your magic works the same way hers did. I think every Omega in recorded history who's shown signs of this power has been executed or exiled before they could become what you've become. And I think the reason I felt you the moment I entered this territory, the reason every instinct I have is screaming at me to protect you and claim you and bind myself to you, is because I'm supposed to. That's insane. Yes. He smiled, and it was sad and fierce and beautiful all at once. It is. But that doesn't make it less true. The magic inside her surged. Not hungry this time. Eager. Reaching for him with an intensity that stole her breath. She could feel that bright thread connecting them, could feel it wanting to solidify, to become permanent, to transform from possibility into certainty. The story, she managed. How did it end? Something flickered across his face. No one knows. The carving stopped before the ending. Either the story was never finished, or the ending was deliberately hidden. Before she could respond, before she could process what any of this meant, the altar began to glow. Soft at first. A pale silver light emanating from the carved symbols. Then brighter. Spreading across the stone surface like water finding channels, following the paths carved into the rock, illuminating the story. Evelyn gasped. Ronan's hand tightened on hers. The light rose from the altar like smoke, like mist, coalescing in the air above them. It took shape. Forms that weren't quite solid but weren't quite transparent either. Wolves made of silver light. 2 of them. Circling each other in an ancient dance. One wolf bore marks on its paws. Scars that glowed brighter than the rest of its form. The other had eyes like storms. It's them, Evelyn breathed. The flame bearer and the storm king. The light wolves moved around each other, and the magic showed them what had been carved into stone. The flame bearer healing the cursed. The storm king defending her while she worked. The bonds forming between them, visible as threads of light that connected their hearts. Then the vision shifted. Showed them danger. Shadow wolves attacking. The flame bearer trying to fight while maintaining the healing magic, trying to save everyone and defend herself simultaneously. Failing. Falling. The storm king standing over her broken body, rage and grief transforming him into something transcendent. Something that blazed with power that made the shadows flee. And then the choice. The vision showed him placing his hands over her heart. Showed light pouring from him into her. Showed the threads that had been slowly killing her redirecting, splitting, half flowing into him instead. Showed her wounds healing. Showed her rising. Showed them standing together, marked by the same power, bound by the same fate. The light wolves merged. Became one form that blazed so brightly Evelyn had to look away. When she looked back, the vision was fading. The glow receding back into the carved stone. The clearing settling into twilight quiet. But something had changed. The magic inside her was singing. A high, clear note of recognition that resonated through her bones. She looked down at her palms and saw the scars glowing faintly, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Evelyn. Ronan's voice was rough. Strained. Your hands. She held them up between them. The silver light was stronger now, no longer just scars but something alive. Something active. And as she watched, she saw matching marks beginning to appear on Ronan's palms. Faint but unmistakable. The mirror image of her own. It's already started, he said quietly. The bond. It began forming the moment I touched you this morning. The shrine is just confirming what we both already knew. I don't understand. Her voice shook. How is this possible? How can a story from centuries ago be about us? Maybe it was never about them. He took both her hands in his, pressing their scarred palms together. The contact sent shockwaves through her entire system. Maybe every generation has a flame bearer and a storm king. Maybe the curse isn't about you specifically. Maybe it's about the magic itself. The way it chooses people. The way it demands balance. The magic surged between them, and Evelyn felt the bond snap fully into place. Felt those thousands of silver threads that had been draining her life suddenly redistribute themselves. Half remained anchored to her. Half flowed into Ronan, connecting to him, binding him to every life she'd ever saved and every death that would eventually come. She waited for him to cry out. To pull away from the sudden burden. To realize what he'd just done and regret it. He did none of those things. Instead, he pulled her closer. Wrapped his arms around her and held her while the magic settled, while the bonds reformed, while everything she'd been carrying alone for 8 years suddenly became something shared. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "I've got you now. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." And Evelyn, who had spent so many years believing she was cursed and dangerous and unworthy of anything resembling love or belonging, finally broke. She sobbed against his chest while the shrine glowed around them and the magic sang its approval, and somewhere in the forest, something ancient and patient and knowing smiled at the sight of two souls finally finding the balance they'd been born to create. They stayed in the shrine until the moon rose full and silver above them. Evelyn couldn't have said how long they stood there, wrapped in each other while the magic settled into its new configuration. Time felt strange in this place, stretched and compressed simultaneously. Minutes might have been hours. Hours might have been heartbeats. But eventually, reality intruded. The sound came first. Footsteps. Many of them. Crashing through the forest with no attempt at stealth. Voices raised in anger and something that sounded horribly like righteousness. Ronan went rigid. His arms tightened around her for just a moment before he released her and turned toward the tree line, his body shifting into a protective stance between her and whatever was coming. "Stay behind me," he said, and his voice had changed. Gone was the gentle man who'd held her while she cried. This was the Alpha King. Command lived in every syllable. The Healer's Council emerged from the trees like an avenging force. 7 of them. All older wolves, their faces carved with lines that spoke of years spent enforcing tradition and stamping out anything that threatened the established order. Evelyn recognized the head counselor immediately. Theron. Gray-haired and sharp-eyed and utterly convinced of his own moral superiority. He'd been the one to exile her 8 years ago. Had looked her 13-year-old self in the eyes and told her she was corrupted. Dangerous. Better off removed from decent society before she could poison anyone else with her unnatural gifts. Now he looked at her with the same disgust, amplified by what appeared to be vindicated rage. So the reports were true. Theron's voice carried across the clearing, sharp and cutting. The cursed child has become a cursed woman. And now she's ensnared even our Alpha King with her forbidden magic. Watch your tone, Theron. Ronan's voice was cold enough to freeze blood. You're speaking about your future queen. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Future queen. He'd said it so casually, so certainly, like it was already decided. Like the bond they'd formed here meant more than just shared burden. Like it meant everything. Theron's face went purple. Queen. She's an abomination. A threat to every natural law our kind has built over centuries. You cannot possibly. I can, Ronan interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerously quiet. And I have. The bond is formed. She's mine now. Mine to protect. Mine to defend. And if you have a problem with that, you're welcome to challenge me for the right to decide. The threat hung in the air like a drawn blade. No one challenged an Alpha King. Not unless they had a death wish. Ronan's reputation was built on the bodies of wolves who'd thought they could take his throne through combat. He'd never lost. Not once. But Theron didn't back down. "The law is clear," he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "Any wolf who practices the forbidden arts must face judgment. Any wolf who forms unnatural bonds must be severed from those bonds or executed. You know this, Your Majesty. You swore to uphold these laws when you took your crown." "I swore to protect my people." Ronan's hands were clenched at his sides, and Evelyn could see the effort it was taking him not to shift, not to let the wolf out to settle this the old way. "And she's one of my people now. The law doesn't account for magic like hers. Doesn't understand what she's been sacrificing to keep your precious warriors alive." "Sacrificing?" One of the other counselors stepped forward. "A woman. Lyra." Evelyn remembered her too. She'd been the one to hold Evelyn down during the ritual that tried to purge her magic. "She's been stealing life force. Creating unnatural bonds. Corrupting the natural order of death and rebirth that the moon goddess intended. She's been healing," Ronan snarled. "While you stood by and declared warriors unsavable, she saved them. And the cost fell on her. Not on them. Not on you. On her. Because the magic is wrong." Theron's voice rose to a shout. "It takes from the healer to give to the wounded. It creates bonds that shouldn't exist. It ties fates together in ways that corrupt the moon goddess's design. This is why it was banned. This is why every Omega who shows signs of this curse must be eliminated before they can." "Before they can what?" Evelyn's voice cut through the clearing, surprising even herself. She stepped out from behind Ronan, ignoring his protest, and faced the counselors directly. "Before they can prove that your laws are built on fear instead of wisdom? Before they can show that maybe, just maybe, the moon goddess gave us this magic for a reason?" Theron's eyes narrowed. "You dare speak of the moon goddess's will? You, who bear the marks of corruption on your very flesh?" Evelyn held up her scarred palms. Let the counselors see the silver light still faintly glowing there. "These marks appeared when I saved my brother's life. I was 12 years old. I didn't ask for this magic. Didn't want it. But it came anyway, and I had a choice. Let him die, or use what I'd been given to save him. What would you have chosen?" "I would have accepted the moon goddess's judgment," Theron said coldly. "As any righteous wolf would." "You mean you would have let a child die?" Evelyn took a step forward. Then another. She was done being afraid. Done letting these wolves make her feel like she was something shameful. "You would have stood by and done nothing while he convulsed and bled and begged for help. And you would have called it righteousness. Called it acceptance. Called it anything except what it really was." "And what was it?" Lyra demanded. "Cowardice." The word fell like a stone. "You're afraid of magic you don't understand. Afraid of power in the wrong hands. Afraid that if people like me exist, it means your neat little hierarchy isn't as divinely ordained as you've been telling yourselves. So you call us cursed. Call us dangerous. Execute us or exile us and convince yourself you're protecting the pack. We are protecting the pack." Theron's face was nearly crimson now. "Your magic creates bonds that drain life force. Every warrior you've healed is now tied to your fate. When you die, they'll feel it. When they die, you'll feel it. You've corrupted dozens of wolves with your interference. Made them dependent on your unnatural gifts. And now you've ensnared the Alpha King himself." "I didn't ensnare anyone." But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Had she? Had the magic somehow manipulated Ronan into this bond? Was his certainty about their connection real, or just another corruption she'd inflicted without meaning to? The bond was mutual, Ronan said firmly, as if he'd heard her thoughts. I chose this. Knowing the cost. Knowing the burden. She didn't force anything. You don't know that. Lyra's voice had gone softer. Almost pitying. The forbidden magic is insidious, Your Majesty. It works on the mind as much as the body. Makes its victims believe they're acting of their own will when really, they're being manipulated by the Omega's power. That's not, Evelyn started, but Theron cut her off. There will be a trial. His voice rang with finality. 3 days hence, at the central grounds. The full council will hear evidence of your crimes. The Alpha King may speak in your defense if he wishes, but the law is clear. If you're found guilty of practicing forbidden magic, the sentence is death. And given the bonds you've already formed, that death will free dozens of warriors from your corruption. Or it will kill them. Ronan's voice was deadly quiet. The bonds work both ways. If she dies, every warrior she's healed will feel it. Some of them might not survive the severing. Then they will die as they should have died in the first place, Theron said coldly. According to the moon goddess's will. Not preserved by unnatural magic that defies the natural order. Evelyn felt something inside her crack. These wolves weren't interested in truth. Weren't interested in understanding. They decided she was guilty the moment her magic manifested, and nothing she said or did would change that. They wanted her dead. And they were willing to let innocent warriors die alongside her if it meant eliminating the threat she represented. You can't do this, she whispered. Those warriors have families. Mates. Children. You'd condemn them to death just to prove a point about your laws? We condemn them to nothing, Lyra said. You did this. You formed the bonds. You corrupted them. Their blood is on your hands, not ours. The injustice of it stole her breath. She'd saved those warriors. Had given pieces of her own life to keep them breathing. And now she was being blamed for putting them at risk? Now she was the villain because her death might hurt the people she'd saved. 3 days, Theron repeated. Use them to make your peace. Say your goodbyes. Because nothing will save you from judgment. Not even the Alpha King's protection. He turned to leave. The other counselors followed. But Lyra paused. Looked back at Ronan with something that might have been genuine concern. She's corrupted you, she said quietly. I can see the marks on your hands. The bond has already taken root. If you don't sever it now, before it fully forms, you'll be dragged down with her. Please, Your Majesty. Don't throw away your life for a cursed Omega who was always meant to burn. Then she was gone, following the others back into the forest. The clearing fell silent except for the wind moving through the trees and Evelyn's ragged breathing. She felt Ronan's hands on her shoulders. Felt him turn her to face him. But she couldn't meet his eyes. Couldn't bear to see doubt there. Couldn't stand the thought that maybe the counselors were right, maybe she had corrupted him, maybe everything he felt was just her magic manipulating him into this bond. Look at me, he said. She shook her head. Evelyn. Look at me. She forced her eyes up. Found his storm-gray gaze locked on hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. I chose this, he said. I choose you. Not because your magic made me. Not because some ancient prophecy said I should. I choose you because when I look at you, I see someone who's been giving everything and asking for nothing. Someone who's been bleeding herself dry to save people who despise her. Someone who deserves to be protected and cherished and loved. They'll kill me. Her voice broke. In 3 days. They'll call it justice and they'll kill me, and you'll. I won't let them. You can't stop them. The law. The law is wrong. He pulled her closer. pressed his forehead to hers. And I'm the Alpha King. If I say the law needs to change, it changes. If I say you're under my protection, you are. And if anyone tries to take you from me, they'll discover exactly why no one has ever successfully challenged my rule. They'll call you corrupted. Let them. They'll say I bewitched you. Let them say whatever they want. His hands came up to cup her face. I know the truth. You know the truth. That's all that matters. Is it? She pulled back enough to look at him properly. Ronan, what if they're right? What if the bond did influence you? What if it didn't? He said it with absolute certainty. I felt you before the bond formed. Before I even knew your name. The pull was there from the first moment I entered this territory. That wasn't magic. That was recognition. My soul knowing yours. She wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly it physically hurt. But doubt had taken root, and the counselor's words kept echoing in her mind. Corrupted. Unnatural. Cursed. We should go, Ronan said quietly. It's not safe here anymore. They'll be watching. Planning. I need to get you somewhere they can't reach you while I figure out how to fight this. Where? Evelyn looked around the shrine, at the ancient stones that had revealed their destiny. Where could we possibly go that the Healer's Council can't follow? His smile was grim. I know a place. Somewhere even the counselors won't dare trespass. But we need to move now, before they come back with more wolves. Before this turns into something we can't walk away from. He held out his hand. Evelyn stared at it. At the faint marks forming on his palm, the mirror of her own scars. At the proof that their fates were already intertwined whether she wanted them to be or not. 3 days until the trial. 3 days until the counselors would call for her death and the deaths of everyone she'd ever saved. 3 days to figure out how to fight a law that had stood for centuries, backed by wolves who believed absolutely in their own righteousness. She took his hand. Not because she believed they could win. But because she was tired of facing the darkness alone. And if she was going to burn, at least she'd burn beside someone who saw her as more than just the curse she carried. The place Ronan brought her to was a cave hidden deep in the mountain territory, accessible only through a narrow pass that required shifting into wolf form to navigate safely. Evelyn had hesitated at the entrance, her wolf smaller and weaker than his, an Omega's build compared to his alpha dominance. But he'd guided her through with patience, never rushing, always staying close enough that she could feel his presence even in the darkness. Now they sat inside a cavern that opened up into something surprisingly beautiful. An underground spring fed a small pool in the corner, the water so clear it reflected the moonlight filtering through cracks in the stone ceiling above. Someone had been here before. Recently. There were furs piled near the pool, a fire pit with wood already stacked, supplies tucked into natural alcoves in the rock. You've used this place before, she said, watching him coax flames to life in the pit. It's where I come when I need to think. When the crown gets too heavy and the council too demanding. He sat back on his heels as the fire caught, orange light dancing across his features. No one knows about it except me. Not even my personal guard. It's safe. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself. She was still in her human form, wearing the simple dress she'd put on that morning, a lifetime ago. It felt like now. The cave wasn't cold, but she couldn't stop shivering. Ronan noticed. He always noticed. He retrieved one of the furs and brought it to her, draping it around her shoulders with a gentleness that made her throat tight. Then he sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and they both stared into the growing flames. The silence stretched. Not uncomfortable, but weighted. Full of things neither of them quite knew how to say. Tell me about them, Ronan said finally. The warriors you saved. I can feel them now. The bonds. But I don't know their stories. Evelyn closed her eyes. Felt the threads humming inside her chest, each one a life preserved, a death delayed. There were so many. Too many to name them all. But some stood out more clearly than others. The first one was Garrick, she said quietly. 3 years ago. He'd been caught in a border skirmish with a rival pack. They'd used silver weapons. The wounds wouldn't heal on their own, and the healers said there was nothing they could do. That silver poisoning was the moon goddess's way of claiming warriors who'd fought dishonorably. But? Ronan prompted. But Garrick had a mate. 2 young daughters. I watched his mate fall apart as the healers told her to prepare for his death. Watched his daughters cry for their father. She pulled the fur tighter. So that night, I went to him. I'd never tried to heal silver poisoning before. Didn't know if I could. But I had to try. What happened? The magic worked. But silver is different. It fights back. Burns. I felt every moment of his agony as I pulled the poison from his blood into mine. It took hours. By the time I was done, I couldn't walk. Couldn't see straight. I collapsed on the floor of his room and woke up 2 days later in my own cottage with no memory of how I'd gotten there. And Garrick? He lived. Made a full recovery within a week. She smiled bitterly. His mate came to thank me. She was so grateful, so happy to have her mate back. I thought maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time, someone would see what I'd done and understand that the magic wasn't evil. That it could help people. But Garrick told the Healers' Council. Told them an Omega had used forbidden magic to cure his silver poisoning. He said he felt violated. Corrupted. Like I'd put something unnatural inside him. Her voice hardened. The council interrogated me for hours. Wanted to know how long I'd been practicing forbidden arts. Who else I'd corrupted. They would have executed me right then if I hadn't convinced them I'd acted alone, that it was a single desperate act that wouldn't happen again. Ronan's hand found hers. Squeezed. But you didn't stop. No. Because 2 weeks later, another warrior came to my door. Bleeding out from a rogue attack. And I couldn't let him die any more than I could let Garrick die. So I saved him too. And then another. And another. She looked at their joined hands. I learned to be careful. To make the healings look natural. To hide the magic. But the bonds kept forming. The threads kept multiplying. And every time I thought about stopping, about letting someone die to save myself, I couldn't do it. You're not like them, Ronan said softly. The counselors. The wolves who fear what they don't understand. You see life as sacred. Worth preserving no matter the cost to yourself. Or maybe I'm just a coward. The words tasted bitter. Maybe I heal people because I can't stand the guilt of watching them die when I could have saved them. Maybe it's selfishness dressed up as sacrifice. That's not selfishness. Isn't it? She pulled away from him, stood up, began pacing the cave. The shadows her body cast on the walls looked monstrous in the firelight. I formed those bonds knowing what it would cost. Knowing it was illegal. Knowing that if I was caught, other people would suffer. And I did it anyway because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. That's not noble. That's just me choosing my own peace of mind over everyone else's safety. Evelyn. They're right, Ronan. She spun to face him. The counselors. They're right about me. I am dangerous. Every bond one form puts another wolf at risk. When I die, and I will die, whether it's in 3 days or 3 years, all those threads will snap. All those warriors will feel it. Some of them might die from the severing. And it will be my fault because I chose to save them knowing this would happen eventually. He stood. Moved toward her with that predatory grace that was equal parts beautiful and terrifying. You're not dangerous. I've corrupted you. She gestured at his hands. At the faint marks still visible on his palms. You said it yourself. The bond split the burden. Which means now you're tied to all those lives too. When they die, you'll feel it just like I will. I've dragged you into my curse, and you're acting like it's some kind of gift. It is a gift. He was close now. Close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. Because it means you're not alone anymore. Because it means when those threads pull and those deaths come, I'll be there to help you carry it. That's not corruption. That's partnership. You didn't choose this. Not really. The bond influenced you. Made you think you wanted. He kissed her. Not gently. Not tentatively. But with a ferocity that stole every word from her lips and every thought from her mind. His hands cupped her face, held her still as his mouth moved against hers with a hunger that spoke of restraint finally broken, of desire too long denied. Evelyn froze for half a heartbeat. Then she was kissing him back just as desperately, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer, needing to feel something other than fear and doubt and the crushing weight of responsibility she'd been carrying alone for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ronan rested his forehead against hers. That, he said roughly, had nothing to do with magic. That was me wanting you. Choosing you. Not because of some bond or some prophecy or some ancient story about wolves who came before us. But because you're brilliant and brave and so determined to save everyone except yourself that it makes me want to shake you and kiss you in equal measure. Ronan. I see you, Evelyn. His thumb stroked her cheeks. All of you. The sacrifice and the strength and the fear you try so hard to hide. I see the way you carry impossible burdens and never ask for help. The way you give and give until there's nothing left. The way you've convinced yourself you don't deserve anything good because some wolves told you that you were cursed when you were just a child. Her eyes burned. You don't understand. Then help me understand. He pulled back just enough to look at her properly. Tell me what I'm missing. Tell me why you can't believe that someone might want to stand beside you not because they're bewitched, but because they've finally found someone worth standing beside. The words cracked something open inside her. Something she'd been holding closed for 8 years. For longer. Maybe since the moment her parents had turned away and let the counselors take her without a fight. I'm afraid, she whispered. I'm so afraid that you'll wake up one day and realize what you've done. That you'll regret binding yourself to me. That you'll look at me the way everyone else does, like I'm something shameful and wrong and better off removed from the world. Never. The word was a vow. I will never look at you like that. Never regret this bond. Never wish I'd walked away when I had the chance. You can't know that. I can. He took her hand. Pressed it flat against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady beneath her palm. Feel that? It beats for you now. Has since the moment I found you outside your cottage. Maybe even before that. Maybe since the first report reached me about an Omega who was saving lives in defiance of every law and expectation. That's insane. Love usually is. He smiled, and it was soft and real and completely unguarded. I love you, Evelyn. Not because of magic. Not because of destiny. But because you're you. And if you can't believe that yet, then I'll just have to keep proving it until you do. The tears came then. Hot and fast and unstoppable. She buried her face in his chest and let herself break while he held her, while the fire crackled and the underground spring murmured and the world outside continued spinning toward a trial that would demand her death. But for this moment, in this cave, she let herself believe. Believe that maybe she wasn't cursed. Maybe she was chosen. Believe that maybe the magic wasn't a punishment but a gift that had been waiting for the right person to help her carry it. Believe that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to want this. Want him. Want a future that looked like something other than slow death and lonely sacrifice. I don't know how to do this, she admitted against his chest. How to trust. How to let someone help. How to believe I'm worth saving. Then let me show you. He tilted her chin up. Kissed her softly this time. Gently. Like she was something precious. We have 3 days. Let me spend them proving that you're not alone. That you're not cursed. That you're exactly who you were always meant to be. And if the trial, we'll face it together. His arms tightened around her. Whatever comes. Whatever they decide. You won't stand before that council alone. I'll be right beside you. And if they try to take you from me, they'll discover that I'm much more dangerous than any forbidden magic. Evelyn looked up at him. At this Alpha King who'd tracked her down expecting disobedience and found sacrifice instead. Who'd felt their connection and chosen to embrace it rather than fear it. Who was offering her something she'd never thought she'd have. Partnership. Protection. Love. 3 days, she whispered. 3 days, he agreed. And whatever happens after, we face it as one. She kissed him again. Let herself sink into the warmth of him, the strength, the absolute certainty that maybe this was right. Maybe this was always how it was supposed to be. Outside, the moon continued its arc across the sky. Inside the cave, 2 souls found the courage to hope. Even if hope was the most dangerous thing of all. The 3 days passed like water through cupped hands. They spent them in the cave, learning each other. Ronan told her about the weight of the crown he'd carried since he was barely 20, about the loneliness of making decisions that affected thousands of lives, about the way power isolated as much as it elevated. Evelyn told him about the warriors she'd saved, about the nights she'd lain awake feeling the threads pull at her, about the strange relief that came with accepting she was dying slowly and the stranger grief of realizing no one would mourn her when she finally did. They didn't talk about the trial. Didn't speak about what would happen when they emerged from this sanctuary and faced the council's judgment. It felt like tempting fate. Like naming the monster would make it real. But reality came for them anyway on the morning of the 3rd day. Ronan woke before dawn, restless in a way he hadn't been the previous nights. Evelyn watched him pace the cave, watched the tension build in his shoulders, watched him transform from the gentle man who'd held her through the darkness into the Alpha King who would have to face his council in a matter of hours. We could run, she said quietly. He turned to look at her. Where would we go? Anywhere. The far territories. Beyond pack lands. We could disappear. Live as rogues. They'd never find us. They'd find us. He came to sit beside her. And even if they didn't, that's not a life. Running. Hiding. Always looking over our shoulders. You deserve better than that. I deserve a trial that's already decided my guilt. No, his jaw tightened. But you deserve the chance to stand before your accusers and make them see the truth. To force them to acknowledge what you've sacrificed. And if they can't see it, if they choose their fear over justice, then we'll leave. Together. But not as fugitives. As exiles who chose freedom over their corruption. Evelyn wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him that the council would never see the truth, that they'd made up their minds 8 years ago when they'd exiled a 13-year-old girl for daring to save her brother. But before she could speak, she felt it. A tug on one of the threads. Sharp. Urgent. Wrong. She gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Ronan was beside her instantly, his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. What is it? What's wrong? One of them. The warriors. She closed her eyes, following the thread, trying to understand what she was feeling. Something's happened. He's hurt. Badly hurt. I can feel. The thread yanked hard enough to double her over. Ronan caught her before she fell. Easy. Breathe. Tell me what you're feeling. Pain. So much pain. And fear. He's terrified. Her eyes snapped open. He's at the trial grounds. They're all there. The council called them. Called all the warriors I've healed. Dread settled in her stomach like ice. We need to go, Ronan said grimly. Now. They shifted and ran, pushing through the mountain pass and into the forest beyond. The trial grounds were at the heart of Pack territory, a massive clearing ringed by ancient oaks where judgment had been passed for generations. It took them an hour to reach it, an hour of running flat out while Evelyn felt that thread pulling tighter and tighter, felt the warrior's pain intensifying, felt something horribly wrong unfolding in real time. They shifted back to human form at the edge of the clearing. And walked into a nightmare. The council had assembled. Not just the 7 from the shrine, but all of them. 20 wolves who held authority over Pack law and tradition. They stood in a semicircle on one side of the clearing, their faces grave and certain. And across from them, bound in silver chains that burned their flesh, were the warriors Evelyn had saved. All of them. Dozens of wolves, some she barely remembered healing, some she'd saved just weeks ago. They knelt in the dirt with their hands shackled behind them, silver burning into their wrists, their faces twisted with pain and confusion and dawning horror. What is this? Ronan's voice cut across the clearing like a blade. What have you done? Theron stepped forward. We've gathered evidence, Your Majesty. As is our right under Pack law. These warriors have all been corrupted by the Omega's forbidden magic. They carry her mark. Her taint. And we intend to prove it. By torturing them? Evelyn's voice shook with rage. She started forward, but Ronan's hand on her arm stopped her. Not torture, Lyra said calmly. Demonstration. The silver chains will reveal the truth of their corruption. If they're bound to you through forbidden magic, they'll feel your presence. React to it. The bonds will become visible. You're hurting them to prove a point. We're revealing the truth. Theron's eyes were cold. Watch. He nodded to one of the other counselors. The wolf stepped forward and placed his hand on the nearest warrior's head. The warrior, Evelyn recognized him now, Stellan. She'd healed him of blood poisoning 6 months ago, jerked like he'd been struck. Then he screamed. The sound tore through the clearing, raw and agonized, and Evelyn felt it echo through the thread connecting them. Felt his pain become hers, felt the silver burning him burn her, felt the violation of having his mind invaded and his memories ripped open for examination. She stumbled. Would have fallen if Ronan hadn't been holding her. Stop. Her voice came out broken. Stop, please, you're killing him. We're doing nothing, Theron said. You're the one killing him. Your bond. Your corruption. Every moment of his agony is your fault. The counselor removed his hand. Stellan collapsed, gasping, blood running from his nose. But he was alive. Barely. You see? Lyra addressed the gathered wolves who'd come to witness the trial. Dozens of them, Pack members who wanted to see justice done. The bond is real. The corruption undeniable. When we touched him, we felt the Omega's magic inside him, coiled around his heart like a parasite. Feeding off him. Draining him. That's not what the magic does. Evelyn shouted. I'm the one being drained. Not them. I'm the one giving my life to keep them alive. Are you? Theron gestured to the kneeling warriors. Then let's test that claim. If you're truly sacrificing yourself for them, the bonds should weaken when you're in pain, yes? The drain should reverse? Too late, Evelyn understood what they intended. Two counselors grabbed her. Ripped her from Ronan's grasp before he could react. Silver chains, just like the ones binding the warriors, locked around her wrists. The burn was instantaneous and excruciating. Silver was poison to their kind. It didn't kill immediately, but it hurt. Moon and stars, it hurt. Like being burned from the inside out, like acid in her veins, like every nerve ending lighting up with agony all at once. She heard Ronan roar. Heard fighting. But she couldn't see through the pain, couldn't think past the silver eating into her flesh, couldn't do anything but scream. And through it all, she felt the threads. Felt every single warrior she'd ever saved jerking in their chains as her pain echoed through the bonds. Felt them crying out, felt their confusion and terror, felt the magic that connected them flaring to life like it was trying to protect her and only making everything worse. You see? Theron's voice cut through her agony. The bonds work both ways. When she suffers, they all suffer. This is the corruption we speak of. This is why the forbidden magic must be eliminated. Release her. Ronan's voice, savage with rage. Release her now or I swear by the moon goddess. Or what? Theron challenged. You'll kill your own counselors? Betray every law you swore to uphold? She's corrupted you too, your majesty. We can all see the marks on your hands. You're as much a victim of her magic as these warriors. I'm not a victim. Ronan snarled. And neither are they. You're the ones causing pain. You're the ones torturing innocent wolves to prove your twisted logic. Innocent? Lyra laughed bitterly. They're corrupted. Bound to an Omega who practices forbidden arts. Their very existence is a violation of pack law. Through the silver-induced haze, Evelyn heard gasps from the gathered crowd. Heard murmurs of agreement. Heard the fear and disgust in their voices as they looked at her kneeling in the dirt, surrounded by warriors who writhed in sympathetic agony. They believed it. Believed she was the monster the council painted her as. Believed the magic was corruption instead of salvation. Believed she deserved this pain, deserved whatever judgment the council handed down, deserved to die so the pack could be pure again. One of the warriors broke. Garrick. The first one she'd saved. He'd been quiet until now, bearing the silver chains with gritted teeth. But watching her scream had been too much. She saved my life. His voice cracked. Desperate. I was dying from silver poisoning. The healers said there was nothing they could do. She gave me another chance. Gave my mate her husband back, gave my daughters their father. How is that corruption? You were meant to die, Theron said coldly. The moon goddess had judged you. By interfering, the Omega defied divine will. And now you're bound to her fate. When she dies, you'll die. Don't you understand? She didn't save you. She delayed your death and tied it to hers. Made you dependent on her continued existence. That's not mercy. That's slavery. I'd rather be bound to her than dead. That's the corruption talking, Lyra said gently. Almost sadly. The magic makes you think you chose this. Makes you grateful for your chains. But you're not free. None of you are. You're puppets dancing on her strings, and you can't even see it. No, another warrior spoke up. Young. Barely 20. Evelyn had healed him 2 months ago after a border skirmish. She didn't make me grateful. She wouldn't let me die. I was ready to. Had made peace with it. But she came to me in the middle of the night and she fixed what the healers couldn't, and yes, it hurt her, I could see it hurt her, but she did it anyway. Because the magic compelled her, Theron insisted. Don't you see? None of this is choice. Not hers, not yours, not even the Alpha King's. It's all the forbidden magic, twisting nature, corrupting bonds, creating connections that were never meant to exist. Evelyn tried to speak. Tried to defend herself, defend the warriors, defend the magic that had never felt evil to her despite what everyone said. But the silver had stolen her voice, left her gasping and shaking and barely conscious. She felt Ronan beside her. Felt him trying to remove the chains. Felt the council's warriors holding him back. The law is clear, Theron pronounced. The Omega is guilty of practicing forbidden magic. Of corrupting dozens of warriors. Of binding the Alpha King himself through unnatural means. The sentence is death. No. Several warriors shouted it. Some struggled against their chains despite the silver burning them. She doesn't deserve this. The sentence is death, Theron repeated. And it will be carried out immediately, so that these warriors might be freed from their corruption before it's too late. You'll kill them. Ronan roared. If she dies, the bonds will sever. You said it yourself. Some of them won't survive it. Then they'll die as they should have died. Theron's face was granite. According to the moon goddess's will. Free of corruption. Pure. The council moved forward. Formed a circle around Evelyn. She felt magic gathering, old magic, ritual magic meant for execution. Meant to make death clean and final and absolute. She was going to die. Here. Now. In front of Ronan and the warriors she'd saved and a crowd of wolves who believed she deserved it. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. The magic inside her surged. One last desperate attempt at survival. It showed her the threads, all of them, pulled taut as bowstrings. Showed her the warriors who would die when she did, the ones whose bonds were too strong to survive the severing. Showed her Ronan, marked with her scars, tied to her fate, about to lose everything because he'd chosen to stand beside her. Showed her what would happen if she didn't fight back. And finally, it showed her what would happen if she did. The silver chains cracked. Not broke. Not yet. But cracked. Thin lines of light appeared in the metal, spreading like fractures in ice. The council didn't notice. Too focused on their ritual. Too certain of their righteousness. But Evelyn noticed. And deep inside her, deeper than the magic she'd been using to heal, deeper than the forbidden power that had marked her as cursed, something ancient stirred. Something that had been waiting for her to stop running. Stop hiding. Stop apologizing for existing. The chains shattered. The explosion of silver light came from Evelyn's body like a star being born. It didn't just break the chains. It obliterated them. Turned the silver into dust that scattered on a wind that hadn't existed a moment before. The counselors stumbled backward, thrown by the force of it, their ritual disrupted before it could complete. Evelyn rose. Not slowly. Not tentatively. But with the inevitability of dawn breaking after the longest night. The burns on her wrists were gone. Healed. More than healed, the skin there glowed with silver light that traced patterns up her arms, across her shoulders, down her spine. Ancient symbols. The same ones carved into the shrine's altar. The same ones the flame bearer had worn in the vision. What is this? Theron's voice shook for the first time. What are you doing? Evelyn looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time in 8 years, she didn't see the man who'd exiled her. Didn't see authority or righteousness or someone to be feared. She saw a small, frightened wolf who'd convinced himself that his fear was wisdom and his cruelty was justice. "I'm done," she said, and her voice resonated with something that made the ground beneath them tremble. "Done hiding. Done apologizing. Done letting you tell me that my gift is a curse because you're too afraid to understand it." The silver light intensified, spread from her body to the warriors still kneeling in chains. Their bonds shattered too, falling away like they'd never existed. The burns on their wrists healed instantly. And as the light touched each of them, Evelyn felt the threads connecting them transform. Not break. Transform. What had been drains became channels. What had been one-way sacrifices became mutual exchanges. The magic showed her how it was supposed to work, how it had always been meant to work before fear and misunderstanding had corrupted the practice into something forbidden. The warriors could give back now. Could share their strength with her instead of only taking. Could support the bond instead of draining it. And as the transformation completed, Evelyn felt life pouring into her from dozens of sources. Felt herself growing stronger, fuller, more whole than she'd been in years. "Impossible," Lyra whispered. "The forbidden magic doesn't work like that. It only takes. Only corrupts." No, Ronan stepped forward, and Evelyn saw that the light had touched him too. Saw the marks on his palms blazing bright, saw power flowing through the bond they'd formed, saw him transformed into something magnificent and terrible. "You made it forbidden because you were afraid. Afraid that Omegas with this gift would have power you couldn't control. So you twisted the practice. Changed it from what it was meant to be into something dark and draining. Made it kill the healers so no one would dare practice it." "That's a lie." Theron's face was purple with rage. "The old laws were written to protect the pack from." "From what?" Evelyn's voice cut through his protest like a blade. "From Omegas who could save lives you deemed unsavable. From magic that didn't fit neatly into your hierarchy. From the possibility that maybe the moon goddess gave some of us gifts that made us equal to alphas instead of subservient." She took a step forward. The crowd parted before her like water. Even the counselors backed away from the light that surrounded her. "You called me corrupted," she continued. "Called my magic forbidden. But the only corruption here is what you've done. You've spent generations making Omegas like me believe we're cursed. Making us use the magic in secret, in fear, in ways that hurt us because we didn't know better. Because you destroyed the knowledge of how it's supposed to work. The old ways were banned for a reason." Theron insisted, but his voice lacked conviction now. "The old ways were banned because they threatened your power." Ronan moved to stand beside Evelyn, and the light surrounding them merged, creating something that blazed bright enough to make the gathered wolves shield their eyes. An Omega who could heal, who could form bonds of mutual strength with warriors, who could stand as an equal to an alpha. That couldn't be allowed. So you made it forbidden. Made it wrong. Made it kill them. The silence that fell over the clearing was absolute. Evelyn looked at the warriors who'd risen from their chains. Saw understanding dawning on their faces. Saw them feeling the transformed bonds, feeling how they could give instead of only take, feeling the rightness of it. "She saved my life," Garrick said quietly. "And I never gave anything back. Never even thought I could. I just accepted it. Accepted that she was dying to keep me alive and told myself that was how it worked. That was the price of forbidden magic." "But it's not," another warrior said. "It doesn't have to be. I can feel it now. The bond. It's not taking from her anymore. It's balanced. She gives, we give. She heals, we strengthen. That's how it's supposed to work." "This is heresy," Lyra whispered. "Everything you're saying goes against centuries of pack law. Against the foundations of our society." "Then maybe," Evelyn said softly, your foundations were built on lies. The ground shook. Not metaphorically. Actually shook. The earth beneath them trembled like something enormous had awakened, like the very bones of the territory were responding to what was happening in this clearing. The ancient oaks ringing the trial grounds began to glow, faint silver light tracing up their trunks, spreading through their branches. The shrine's magic. It was here. Responding to Evelyn's transformation. Confirming what she'd become. What she'd always been meant to be. The flame bearer, someone in the crowd whispered. She's the flame bearer reborn. No, Ronan's voice was firm. Certain. She's not a reborn anything. She's Evelyn. And she's exactly what the moon goddess intended when she gave some Omegas this gift. What your laws tried to destroy but couldn't. Theron looked around desperately, seeing his support crumbling. The gathered wolves were staring at Evelyn with wonder instead of disgust. The warriors she'd saved were standing with her instead of against her. Even some of the counselors looked uncertain now, questioning. She still violated the law, he said, but it came out weak. Still practiced forbidden magic. The punishment. There is no punishment. The voice that spoke wasn't Evelyn's or Ronan's. It came from the edge of the clearing. Old. Female. Weighted with authority that made even Theron fall silent. An ancient wolf stepped into the light. She was small, bent with age, but power radiated from her in waves that made the Alpha King's strength look like a candle next to the sun. Evelyn had never seen her before, but somehow she knew who this was. The pack's eldest. The one who remembered the old ways before they'd been forbidden. The one who'd been alive when the last flame bearer had walked these lands. Elder Nearest, Theron breathed. But you haven't left your den in decades. Why? Because I felt it. The old wolf's eyes fixed on Evelyn. Felt the moment she stopped hiding what she was. Felt the magic remember itself. And I came to see if it was true. She smiled, and it was sad and proud and ancient. It is. After 3 generations, the gift has finally returned in its true form. You can't condone this, Lyra protested. The laws were written by wolves who feared what they didn't understand. Nearest moved closer to Evelyn, her steps slow but sure. I was there when they were written. Was young then, but old enough to remember the truth they tried to bury. The flame bearers weren't cursed. They were blessed. And the bonds they formed weren't corruption but symbiosis. Healing that flowed both ways. Strength shared instead of stolen. Then why ban it? Evelyn asked. If it was a blessing, why make it forbidden? Because it made Omegas powerful. Nearest's voice was bitter. And the alphas of that generation couldn't allow it. An Omega who could heal, who could form bonds with warriors that made them stronger, who could stand beside an alpha as an equal. That threatened everything they'd built. So they changed the practice. Forced flame bearers to use the magic in isolation, without the alpha bond that made it sustainable. Let them burn out and die and called it proof the magic was evil. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. You knew, Ronan said quietly. All these years. You knew the truth and said nothing? I was forbidden from speaking of it. Nearest looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. By the very wolves who wrote those laws. They bound me with oaths that would have killed me if I broke them. But the oaths didn't account for this. For the magic remembering itself. For a flame bearer finding her Storm King and completing the bond before anyone could stop it. She turned to the council. To Theron and Lyra and the others who looked like their entire world was crumbling. The old law is void, she said. Not because I say so. But because the magic itself has proven it false. Look at her. Look at what she's become. Look at the bonds she's formed, the warriors she's strengthened, the alpha who stands beside her unmarked by corruption. This is what the moon goddess intended. This is the truth your laws tried to bury. But the consequences, Theron said desperately. If we allow this, if we change the laws, it will destabilize everything. The hierarchy. The order. Everything we've built. We'll adapt. Ronan's voice was steel. Or be swept away. Because I'm not letting you kill her to preserve your comfortable lies. And I'm not letting you continue forcing Omegas with this gift to hide or die. The law changes. Now. Tonight. Or I'll tear down your council and build a new one that understands what the moon goddess actually intended. Silence. Then, slowly, one of the warriors knelt. Then another. Then more. Not to the council. Not to the Alpha King. To Evelyn. To the Omega who'd saved their lives and transformed their bonds and shown them that strength could come from unexpected places. We stand with the flame bearer, Garrick said. Whatever comes. Whatever the council decides. We stand with her. The crowd murmured. Some in agreement. Some in fear. But the tide had turned. Evelyn could feel it. Could feel the moment when her story shifted from tragedy to transformation. Elder Nearest approached her. Placed an ancient, trembling hand over Evelyn's heart. You'll have to be careful, she said quietly. The gift is powerful, but it's not unlimited. Form too many bonds and even with your alpha to share the burden, you'll burn. And there will be wolves who fear you anyway. Who can't accept that an Omega can be this strong. I know. Evelyn covered the old wolf's hand with her own. But I'm done hiding. Done pretending I'm less than I am to make others comfortable. Good. Nearest smiled. The world needs more Omegas like you. Ones who refuse to be small. She turned to Ronan. And more alphas like you. Ones who understand that true strength comes from partnership, not dominance. She stepped back. Addressed the entire clearing. The trial is over, she declared. The Omega called Evelyn is innocent of all charges. Her magic is not forbidden but blessed. Her bonds are not corruption but gift. And any wolf who harms her or interferes with her practice will answer to me personally. Is that understood? The council had no choice but to bow their heads. To accept. To watch their carefully constructed world of rigid hierarchy and controlled power begin its slow collapse. But not all of them could accept it gracefully. Theron's face twisted with rage. With hatred. With the absolute conviction that he was right and the world was wrong. This isn't over, he hissed. You may have fooled them. May have fooled the elder. But I know the truth. You're an abomination. And one day, you'll prove it. One day, everyone will see what I see. He never finished the threat. Because Ronan was on him in a heartbeat, moving faster than should have been possible, slamming the old wolf against one of the ancient oaks with a hand around his throat. Speak to her that way again, Ronan said, his voice deathly quiet, and it will be the last thing you ever say. Am I clear? Theron gasped. Nodded. Fear finally breaking through his self-righteous fury. Ronan released him. Turned back to Evelyn. And in his eyes, she saw everything. Love and pride and fierce protective devotion. Come on, he said, holding out his hand. Let's go home. Evelyn took his hand. Let him lead her from the clearing while the warriors followed and the crowd parted and the silver light that had transformed everything slowly faded into a warm glow that settled beneath her skin like second heartbeat. She wasn't cursed. She was blessed. And she was finally free. The days that followed were strange. Evelyn moved through the packed lands with Ronan at her side, and everywhere she went, wolves stopped and stared. Some with wonder. Some with lingering fear. Some with a hope so desperate it hurt to look at, hope that maybe their world was changing, that maybe strength could come from places they'd been taught to despise. The warriors she'd saved became her protectors. Garrick especially. He stayed close, as if he could somehow repay the years she'd spent bleeding for him by standing between her and anyone who looked at her with malice. The others did the same. Created a shield of bodies and loyalty around her, around this Omega who defied every law to keep them breathing. But it was the young ones who broke her heart. 3 days after the trial, a girl approached her. Couldn't have been more than 14. She had scars on her palms. Silver marks that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Marks that meant she carried the same gift Evelyn did. The same curse the council had spent generations trying to eliminate. "Is it true?" the girl whispered, her voice shaking with fear and hope in equal measure. "Is it true that the magic isn't evil? That I'm not corrupted?" Evelyn had knelt in the dirt. Had taken the girl's scarred hands in her own and felt the familiar pull of the gift recognizing itself. Had seen in this child's eyes the same terror she'd carried at that age, the same crushing certainty that she was wrong and broken and deserved whatever punishment the pack decided to inflict. "You're not corrupted," Evelyn had said firmly. "You're blessed. And you're not alone anymore. I'll teach you. Show you how the magic is supposed to work. How to form bonds that strengthen instead of drain. How to be what you were always meant to be." The girl had cried. Had thrown herself into Evelyn's arms and sobbed like something vital had been unlocked inside her. And Evelyn had held her and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Not burden this time. Purpose. She wasn't just healing warriors anymore. She was healing a legacy. Reclaiming knowledge that had been deliberately destroyed. Showing the pack what they'd lost when they'd chosen fear over understanding. Not everyone was happy about it. Theron and his faction remained opposed, though they'd been stripped of enough authority that they couldn't act openly. But Evelyn felt their eyes on her. Felt their resentment building like storm clouds. Felt the certainty that this wasn't over, that the battle she'd won at the trial was just the first of many she'd have to fight. But she wasn't fighting alone anymore. Ronan had made good on his promise. Changed the laws. Declared the practice of healing magic not only legal but sacred. Established protections for Omegas who carried the gift. Created a council seat specifically for flame bearers, a voice in pack governance that couldn't be silenced or dismissed. And he'd claimed her. Formally. Publicly. In a ceremony that left no doubt that she was his mate, his equal, his chosen partner in ruling the pack. The mark he'd placed on her throat was visible for all to see. A declaration that harming her meant facing him, and no one in their right mind wanted to face the Alpha King's fury. Tonight, they stood together on the balcony of his den, looking out over the pack lands that were slowly, painfully learning to transform. "Do you regret it?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Taking this on? Appending centuries of tradition? Making enemies of half your council?" Ronan pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Not for a single heartbeat. They'll fight us. Theron and the others. They'll find ways to undermine what we're building. Let them try." She felt him smile against her skin. They're old wolves clinging to old fears. But the young ones? The warriors who felt what real healing magic can do? The Omegas like you who've spent their whole lives believing they were cursed? They're on our side. And they're the future. It's going to take time. Then we'll take time. He turned her to face him, his storm-gray eyes serious. "Evelyn, I didn't do this because it was easy. I did it because it was right. Because you deserved better than a world that called you cursed for being extraordinary. Because those young Omegas with marks on their palms deserved better than exile or execution. Because the pack deserved to remember what it lost when it chose fear. "I love you," she whispered. Still strange to say. Still terrifying in how much it meant. "I know." He kissed her softly. "I love you too. My flame bearer. My equal. My mate." The wind picked up, carrying the scents of the forest, the pack, the life they were building together. Evelyn breathed it in and felt the threads humming inside her chest. Dozens of them now, all transformed, all balanced. Warriors she'd saved. Young Omegas she was teaching. Ronan, whose bond blazed brighter than all the others combined. She wasn't dying anymore. Wasn't slowly burning herself out to keep others alive while receiving nothing in return. The magic had found its balance. And so had she. But standing there, wrapped in Ronan's arms, looking out over a pack that was still deciding whether to embrace the change or fight it, Evelyn understood something fundamental. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of a new story. One where Omegas with silver-scarred palms weren't executed or exiled but celebrated. Where healing magic wasn't forbidden but honored. Where the old hierarchies that said alphas were strong and Omegas were weak began to crack and transform into something better. Something truer. But it would be a fight. Every step of the way. There would be wolves like Theron who couldn't accept the change. Who would see her as threat instead of gift. Who would spend their lives trying to prove she was corrupted, trying to turn the pack against her, trying to restore the comfortable lies they'd lived with for generations. And there would be moments when she doubted. When the weight of responsibility felt crushing. When she wondered if she'd made the right choice, standing up instead of running, claiming her power instead of hiding it, dragging Ronan and the warriors and all those young Omegas into a battle that might destroy them all. But then she'd remember. Remember the girl with scarred palms looking at her with desperate hope. Remember the warriors kneeling in recognition of strength they'd never expected to find in an Omega. Remember Ronan standing beside her, choosing her, loving her, believing in her even when she couldn't believe in herself. Remember that she'd spent 8 years alone, dying slowly, convinced she deserved nothing better. And now she had everything. Purpose. Partnership. A future that looked like transformation instead of tragedy. Was it terrifying? Yes. Was it uncertain? Absolutely. But it was hers. And she was done apologizing for claiming it. So here's the question that matters. The question Evelyn asked herself every morning when she woke up next to the Alpha King and felt the silver light humming beneath her skin and knew that wolves across the territory were still deciding whether she was savior or abomination. Would you have chosen her side? If you'd been in that clearing, watching her break her chains and transform the magic from curse to gift, watching the old laws crumble and new ones being born, watching an Omega claim power that was supposed to be impossible. Would you have knelt? Or would you have been one of the voices calling her corrupted? If you'd seen her scars, her sacrifice, her willingness to bleed herself dry for warriors who despised her, would you have called it noble? Or would you have called it dangerous? If you'd felt the pull of that ancient magic, the recognition that maybe the moon goddess gave some wolves gifts that didn't fit neatly into comfortable hierarchies, would you have embraced it? Or would you have been afraid? Because that's what this story is really about. Not just a girl who discovered she was more than her curse. Not just an alpha who chose love over tradition. But the question we all face when something challenges what we've always believed. When someone demands we see them differently than we were taught to. When the world offers us a chance to transform or stay comfortable in our familiar fears. Do we choose growth? Or do we choose safety? Do we kneel to unexpected strength? Or do we fight to maintain the hierarchies that make us feel secure? Do we see the flame bearer as blessed? Or do we see her as just another girl with too much fire, too much power, Too much refusal to be small? Evelyn's story isn't finished. She's still teaching young Omegas. Still healing warriors. Still fighting against wolves who believe she's an abomination. Still learning to carry the weight of being exactly what she was born to be, even when the world calls her dangerous for it. Still choosing, every single day, to burn bright instead of hiding her light. And maybe that's the real magic. Not the silver flames or the sacred bonds or the ancient prophecies. But the courage to be extraordinary when the world demands you be ordinary. The courage to save lives when it costs you everything. The courage to love when you've been taught you're unworthy of it. The courage to transform when staying cursed would be so much easier. So if this story lit something inside you. If you felt that pull when Evelyn finally stopped running and claimed her power. If you want more tales about wolves who refuse to fit into neat categories, who demand the world see them differently, who choose fierce love and impossible courage even when it terrifies them. Then subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. Because here, we don't tell stories about perfect heroines who wait to be saved. We tell stories about women who save themselves. And the Alpha King strong enough to stand beside them.